Universal Casualty, Super Q, los Miami Dolphins y tú rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Son los Dolphins, nuestros Miami Dolphins, el team número 1 en toda la nación. Y son ellos orgullo de Miami y de todos los latinos en la capital del sol. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Este año no me hablen de los Redskins, no me hablen de los Chargers, ni de los Dallas Cowboys, porque los Dolphins son número 1 y lo demostrarán al llegar al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Nuestra línea está mejor que nunca y nuestra defensiva fue siempre la mejor. Y es por eso que yo no tengo duda que los Miami Dolphins ganarán el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Universal Casualty y Super Q, los primeros. Bueno, caballeros, todo el mundo que cante con nosotros. Dame una D, dame una O, dame una L, dame una P, una H, una I, una N, una S. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos? Miami Dolphins. Me voy para el Super Bowl. 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 Me voy para el Super Bowl.
You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team that's in our hearts. We've got love that won't depart.
Hello, Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
What's up, Brain? What are you doing that isn't watching the Miami Heat right now?
I'm first and foremost, I'm recording this podcast. I'm
also
also enjoying a little beverage here.
I would imagine that whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is anybody is doing, they're probably enjoying it more than watching whatever it is the Heat are doing right now.
Oh, yeah. They're
Shout out to everybody joining us live on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel that I'm a Miami Dolphin fan Facebook page. Thank you for watching this instead of whatever it is the Miami Heat are doing.
It was a nice run. They got their game. When we went into that series, I said, would love to get a game. They got their game. I think it was pretty sweet that it happened in Boston.
Yes.
And that it happened early enough in the series that it kind of created some drama.
Yes.
But reality set in pretty quick.
Well, I mean, that team, I don't even think that team at full strength was going to beat Boston. Not this particular Boston team. I mean, I guess with Jimmy Butler, all things are possible, but this Miami Heat team, where's my brain? This Miami Heat team was flawed from the beginning, but this isn't a Miami Heat podcast. This is the Miami Dolphins podcast. It is, in fact, the Same Old Dolphin Show, and we are thrilled to be with you tonight talking about the 2024 NFL Draft and how the Miami Dolphins did. We're going to give you some draft grades for each player that the Dolphins took. Then we'll wrap up by giving you our thoughts about how it went overall and where the Dolphins are and where they go from here. But first, before we do that, a reminder to you, if you're not doing so already, to make sure that you are following us on X, which you can find at twitter.com. I'm Amplified to Rock. He is at Aaron the Brain. The show is at Same Old Dolphins. You can download, rate, review, and subscribe to the Same Old Dolphin Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, everywhere you get your podcasts. We invite you to visit DolphinsTalk.com each and every day for all things Miami Dolphins. And make sure, if you haven't done so already, if you're watching us live right now on the I'm a Miami Dolphin fan Facebook page, head on over to YouTube. Watch us live on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. If you're already on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel, take a second, right now, 1 second, smash the thumbs up button. Give us a like. That helps the algorithm. It's just generally good vibes. If you're watching live, if you're watching after the fact on demand, smash that like button. We appreciate it very much. Leave us a comment with the answer to the following question. What grade would you give the Miami Dolphins on their 2024 NFL draft class? That's what I want to know. What grade would you give the Dolphins on their draft this year? And then, make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you're doing all those good things. Subscribe to the channel because lots of good stuff coming your way. And make sure you're following us because we've got some big stuff coming your way later this summer. That's a hint. That's a tease. And I'm not going to talk about it anymore on this episode. So, Brain, let's get into it. Let's start right off the top. First pick, Dolphins picking at number 21, round number 1. A lot of guys on the board, a lot of guys off the board, including Troy Fontenot that goes immediately before to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bummer. But the Dolphins at 21, they go with the guy that we talked about in the last episode, the guy that I asked you about. And I said they either take him at 21 or they don't take him at all. The Dolphins got their guy. They got their guy named Chop Robinson, edge, Penn State. Now, Brain, to me, it felt like this was a pretty good pick. Maybe not the perfect pick for the spot, but there was a lot of animosity directed at the Dolphins and Chris Greer for picking Chop Robinson at 21. And my interpretation about that anger was that people were upset that the Dolphins didn't go out of their way to trade up to get the offensive lineman that people wanted them to take at 21. But instead they end up with Chop Robinson. So talk to me about how you felt about that pick of Chop Robinson, edge, Penn State University.
Well, first off, I wouldn't have traded up. There was virtually no scenario where I trade up in that situation. you don't have the draft capital. It doesn't make sense. I'm not trading a really valuable asset as far as a draft pick to move up one spot. And there's nobody knows that Pittsburgh was even entertaining the idea of trading down. So you might have to jump over Pittsburgh to go up more spots than that. And it's like, what are you trading to move up? I just look at going into the draft. I made it very clear in our last episode. I have no desire to move up. I don't care who the player is. I'm not moving up because we need as many picks as possible, and giving away picks on this draft wasn't going to make sense to me. So that I don't understand being angry at that. Now myself at 21, look, we were watching that first round, and I don't remember what pick it was. Maybe we got to like pick 13, 14, maybe it was even 15. I don't have the board in front of me of how these picks started coming off the board, but we were like, man, this draft is falling perfectly. All these quarterbacks are going. It's just all the edge guys are still there. All the offensive linemen are still there for the most part. This was looking really good, but what happened is that, none of the corners went. The run on wide receivers didn't really happen before the Dolphins picked. And so sure enough, the run on offensive linemen and edge guys happened right in front of the Dolphins. And so you ended up with pick 21, where if you wanted an edge, if you came into this draft and you said, I need to get a really good edge defender, you kind of had to take Chop Robinson, because there was the class fell off a cliff after him, and he was clearly the best edge guy on the board. Now, could you make the argument? Well, you can't let yourself be in that situation, and you can't draft for need. So maybe you trade down and you say, well, I'm going to try my best to trade down a few picks. Maybe I could still get Chop Robinson a few picks later and pick up some more draft capital. Yeah, I think that's something that I would have explored. We're not privy to those phone calls, so we don't know if that was offered, if anybody wanted to trade up to get that pick. We also don't know if they trade down, if Chop Robinson ends up not being there. And then if you really needed to get an edge defender, then you kind of miss out. Now, I'm of the opinion that you should never go into a draft needing to fill a specific need in a specific round, particularly in the first two rounds of the draft. Maybe when you get to round 3, if you really need to address a certain position, maybe you do that. But rounds 1 and 2, I'm almost exclusively taking best player available, unless it's absolutely a position that you just really are stacked at and you don't really have a need even in the foreseeable future. And so
with all that out of the way, with all that preamble out of the way,
they
draft Chop Robinson. So talk to me about this player and how you feel about him being the guy at 21.
I think it's fine. I think it's a very Chris Greer pick. I think you've got a guy with tremendous upside. If he reaches his ceiling, it's going to be a home run pick. But I think there are considerable questions given, the type of player that he is. He's not the most dense guy. He's not, the biggest guy. And so there are questions about him being an every down edge defender, or is this guy more of a pass rushing specialist? And if he ends up just being a pass rushing specialist, he ends up being, your a la Andrew Van Ginkel. Yes. Could he be the best pass rushing specialist in the league? Great. But that's not value at pick 21 in the first round. And that's kind of where, and so I would have given it a B. That would have been my grade on that pick. I think you got a lot of upside. You swung for the fences. You took a guy that is in a premier position. It's a position of need. And you can make the argument that he was the best player available. He wasn't the best player available as far as I'm concerned, but that's fine. I'm fine with the pick.
Great. So then we move on to the second round and pick number 55. And this was a pick where if the opinions were somewhat split on Chop Robinson, and I would say that it was the reaction to Chop Robinson was probably 3/4 positive and 25% negative based on how I was experiencing the reactions in the moment that the pick happened. I would almost flip-flop them for the second pick, because at number 55, the Dolphins drafted offensive tackle Patrick Paul out of the University of Houston. And this was a guy that a lot of people, including some of your big draft nicks, were very unhappy about, because this seems to be a guy who dominated in college because of his size, but a guy whose technique simply is not at the level. And it is now going to be a guy that it feels as though this is going to be a project a la Austin Jackson when the Dolphins drafted him. And the feeling is, the consensus that a lot of people were thinking about coming into this draft was that if the Dolphins were going to draft an offensive lineman, they needed to find an offensive lineman who was going to basically come out of the box ready to go. And that is not what the Dolphins have here. It seems like the Dolphins have picked a guy in Patrick Paul who's going to take some work. And yes, he has a ceiling because of his size, because of his athleticism. This is a guy where, the sky's the limit in terms of what he's going to be able to give you. The question is, when or if he's ever going to be able to give it to you.
Yeah, and this is another classic Chris Greer pick. Premier position. Lots of traits. Lots of, size, athleticism, height, weight, speed guy. But on the tape, there's significant flaws and significant questions. And so what I'll say is about this pick is that a lot of scouts and draft nicks and, experts were all over the board on Patrick Paul. You had some people thinking that he, giving him like a late first round grade. And some people, ESPN had him graded as their 18th best offensive tackle. And so depending on who you listen to, this was either really great value, a massive reach, or right about where he should have been picked. And I'll let you decipher where he should have been picked. But the fact of the matter is again, this is a high leverage pick. The 55th pick in the draft. It's a second round pick. And you've got a guy that's a developmental project. Does he have a huge upside? Yeah, he's got a huge upside. And again, if he hits his ceiling, this is a home run of a pick. But it is a major question mark. And I think the biggest issue that I have with this pick is that you're going to have a lot of people that talk about, and we'll talk more about the draft as a whole at the end of this, but a lot of people are saying, well, the Dolphins treated this draft like they're drafting for 2025, not so much for 2024. And that's the people that are making sense of the Patrick Paul pick. Well, I have a question for you. If you're playing for 2025 and your plan is 2025 is the year that we're going to be competing for a Super Bowl, your plan is to go in with a left tackle who has been sitting on the bench his entire rookie year and is all of a sudden going to be ready. You're just hoping he's going to be ready to be a left tackle, even though his film would show you that he's very far from being ready. I would say that's not necessarily a great plan going into your 2025, this is our year season.
That is a very fair point that you've just made right there. And we'll come back to that when we get to the end and we're doing our roundup here. So that was where the Dolphins were at 55, bringing in Patrick Paul. From there, we expected that the Dolphins would not make a pick again until 158 in round 5. But we heard we heard after night 1 that the Dolphins were trying to trade back up into round 1. And then we heard after round 2 that the Dolphins were trying to trade back into round 2, perhaps, to get involved again. Nothing came of that ultimately until, well, suddenly we found ourselves in day 3 and the Dolphins made a move very early on, trading a 2025 third round pick. And this is the Miami Dolphins' current third round pick in 2025. They traded to the Philadelphia Eagles for pick number 120, who the Miami Dolphins turned into Jaylen Wright, running back, Tennessee. And this got a lot of people fired up because he was, for a lot of people, a top 3 running back in this draft class. And what we saw was that the Miami Dolphins correctly anticipated a run on running backs, because after Jaylen Wright, the next a bunch of the next picks off the board were running backs. So the Dolphins found their spot, made their move, and went after it. Now, Brain, in our private conversation, you took issue with the fact that the Dolphins traded a 25 third round pick for a 2024 fourth round pick that they turned in to Jaylen Wright. I know that there are a lot of people that think that's an overpay, that there's, but at the end of the day, you're taking that third round pick and you're trading it for a guy who you believe can be an instant contributor and who becomes, according to the reports, they traded that third round pick for a guy who is now the best pass runner in the running back, pass blocker rather, in the running back room for the Miami Dolphins. So at least that's what some people are saying. I'm just reporting the reporting. So anyway, the Dolphins make that move. They've got the guy. He's a speed guy from the University of Tennessee, and he joins an already pretty crowded running back room. My tweet at the time was, I hope everybody will join me in wishing the best in future endeavors to Savon Ahmed, because it seems hard to imagine that he's going to survive in that running room with Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Devon Achane, Chris Brooks, and now Jaylen Wright.
Wow, there's a long way to go, and training camp,
yes,
injuries.
Anything can happen between now and the week 1.
Yeah, so in all likelihood, yes. If all these guys are healthy, I agree with you that you're probably right. That probably spells the end for Savon Ahmed. I don't want to downplay pass protection as a running back. I think it is important, but no running back has ever been drafted for his pass protection. So
except for Jared Dokes.
Certainly not in the third round.
Yeah.
Not in the fourth round for that matter.
No, there will be no Jared Doak slander on this website.
What I would say is it seems like the Dolphins got a good player here, and that's the most important part of this. Do I love the value given that if the Dolphins had the 120th pick and took Jaylen Wright, I think it would be a really, really good pick. The fact that they traded a third rounder next year to get into the fourth round to take him, it's not so much about Jaylen Wright. It's about the running back position. Because we've sat here year after year after year and said, these guys are a dime a dozen. And the way this regime has valued that position, it would seem like they pretty much agree with you. The position is sort of a dime a dozen. They don't put a lot of stock into that position. So to trade up as much as they did, and I get the argument, like, oh, we're all assuming we're going to have 2 comp picks in the third round next year. Well, those 2 comp picks, first off, not assured because it's dependent on playing time. But even if that's the case, because those picks haven't been assigned yet, you're giving away your natural third round pick, which, that nobody knows where that's going to end up being, but it's probably going to be somewhere depending on how good you think the Dolphins are, it's probably going to fall somewhere between like 15 to 25 next year. And so let's say they pick exactly in the same spot that they do next year.
Whoa. What is this? The Dolphins are picking 32 next year. What are you talking about? Come on.
Is next year 2025 the year that
I'm
they're playing for? Is that
I'm just saying.
But now they're playing for 2024 all of a sudden?
I'm just saying.
Anyway,
let's assume. Let's be positive.
Let's assume that they end up picking 22nd in the third round. That would make that pick what, the 88th or the 86th pick? So they basically traded down 34 spots. They traded down essentially an entire round. Well, basically an entire round, because you're talking probably comp picks there at the end. Anyway, so they traded down 34 spots, probably somewhere in that neighborhood, to draft a running back. I don't know that there's great value there. But that said, I think they got a good player. I think they got a player that can help them this year. And I think it makes sense long-term when you consider, look, Raheem Mostert is an older player. Yes, they gave him an extra contract extension to give him an extra year at the end of his contract to give themselves some flexibility. So if they want to bring him back next year, they can, but it's not going to cost them very much to get rid of him. If they want to get rid of him next year, there's a very decent chance that Jaylen Wright is your number one running back in 2025, especially considering that Devon Achane is a guy that, you know, never really carried the load. It was never a high volume guy in college. He's very much undersized, and he dealt with, you know, his share of injuries as a rookie. And so it's not like he really handled the workload as a rookie. And there's significant question marks about how much of a workload he can handle. So I think that this pick, if this player is a good player, if he's a good running back and he's got the athleticism, there's some ball security issues that are kind of getting swept under the rug that haven't been talked about a lot, I think. But this is potentially a really valuable weapon that was added. I didn't have a problem with the pick. I didn't love the value. But again, I think given everything, this is probably a B. And just to go back to Patrick Paul, because I didn't assign a letter grade to that specific pick, I would have given that pick a D.
Love it. All right. Back to the draft, to the spot where we were expecting the Dolphins to pick next. Round 5, number 158. The Dolphins go with another edge rusher, Mohamed Kamara from Colorado State. Brain, this was a guy that a lot of people were thinking this was a great value for the Miami Dolphins at 158.
Anything, the people that I respect, that I read up on, and read their rankings prior to the draft, had Mo Kamara as a potential steal of the draft, as a guy who was being mocked in the 4th and 5th round, but many had him as a 3rd round grade. And lo and behold, he's there in the 5th round. This is a guy with tremendous production. He dropped almost solely on arm length. This is a guy that, because he's 6'1", isn't the longest guy and doesn't have the long arms, profiles athletically as good as just about any pass rusher in the draft. If he was 6'3" and his arms were like an inch or two longer, this guy probably would have been a 1st round pick because of his athletic profile and because of his film. But because he's got shorter arms, and there's a lot of, you know, empirical evidence of of edge rushers that have come in with shorter arms, that, you know, because they can kind of, you know, the offensive tackles can get their hands on them before they can, you know, shed that block, you know, that could be something that's an issue. And it's something to take into account when you project Mo Kamara going forward. But in the 5th round, to get a guy with that athletic profile and that production at the college level, I think is a home run pick, especially considering that you still really kind of needed an edge rusher, even taking Chop Robinson in the first round. I still think you could use another edge coming out of this draft, and I think they got a darn good one.
So give it a grade.
I thought this was an A.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were very happy with this pick for the Miami Dolphins. From there, we go to round 6. Now, Brain, before we get into the details of this pick, this is a very important pick, a pick that I hold near and dear to my heart. Because the Miami Dolphins had to say goodbye to a close personal friend of the podcast in order for this pick to come to fruition. Do you remember? Do you remember who that was?
Wait, say that again?
The Dolphins traded away a friend of the podcast to get this pick.
To get this 5th round. Oh, this was the Dan Feeney pick?
There he is. Would you just look at this beautiful man? We never got to see Dan Feeney play a regular season football game for the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins traded him away before he could truly know life as a Miami Dolphin. But Dan Feeney died. So Malik Washington, a receiver from from Virginia, not West Virginia, a wide receiver from Virginia, could live. Dolphins drafting Malik Washington with pick number 184 from Chicago that they got in exchange for Dan Feeney. And Brain, this is another guy that a lot of people were fired up about. He's got a similar profile to Tyreek Hill in that he's a smaller body guy, but he can play out of the slot and he's got some speed. A lot of people very fired up about Malik Washington.
Yeah, this is another guy that, a lot of people were high on, and I guess he dropped because, they see him as a slot guy only, and he's very much undersized, but I think he's a football player. And I think
I'll say this. I really like that the Dolphins draft football players as opposed to like baseball players.
Well, I when I say that, I mean, this guy's a football player. He's not an athlete.
That's fair enough.
Patrick Paul, I don't know if he's going to end up being more of a football player or if he was just more of a, an athlete, a physical freak. And, could kind of say the same thing about Chop Robinson, although I think he's a little bit better than that and probably deserves better than that. But Malik Washington, this is another guy that a lot of people were high on. And when you look at and you watch, the tape, this guy plays bigger than he is. He's built dense. He's short. He's not tall. He's got short arms. He doesn't have big hands. I get that. But he also can break tackles, can make contested catches, and had one of the best drop rates in the entire college football, in the entire country last year. As a guy who was targeted, I think something like 138, 139 times. So I think they got themselves a guy who can step right in and be a slot receiver for you. And, if you don't go out and add another receiver post June 1st, I think this guy comes in and he's probably your number 1 slot receiver, probably your 3rd receiver. I don't think you're going to play him on the boundary. And so, he's not going to, depending on how you view a depth chart, you might consider, an Eric Ezukanma as a number 3 guy, or, if they go out and they get like an Odell Beckham, that guy obviously becomes your number 3 guy. But this guy could be your number 1 slot receiver going into this year. And again, I think this is another explosive weapon. And that's the thing that I take away out of this pick and the Jaylen Wright pick is the Dolphins have gotten deeper with explosive weapons, because now, they have more explosive weapons than you can put on the field at the same time, but they have so many iterations of it that they could put out there because of the guys that, Malik Washington runs a 4.43. So he's not sub 4.4 like many of these other guys. The only reason he's not sub 4.4 is because he's short, because he can't open up and doesn't have that high end speed, but his short burst explosiveness. He's every bit as fast in short short areas as those guys. So when you talk about Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, now you've got Jaylen Wright, now you've got Malik Washington. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Mike McDaniel's going to have a lot of fun with all the weaponry. This is another A pick.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of wackiness on this offense just because of all the speed that they're going to be able to utilize at any given time. From there, Dolphins go to the 6th round, pick number 198. They pick Patrick McMorris, a safety out of California. Brain, this was a pick that people maybe not as excited about as some of these other ones.
Yeah, well, I think you get to a certain point in the draft where you look at the board and nobody really wows you. And so you say, well, we kind of need to address this position. We could use a little bit more depth at this position. And you find a guy that you like. You know, maybe it's a diamond in the rough. Maybe it's somebody that you interviewed and a scout pounds the table for, or a coach interviewed him and said, you know what, I just love this guy. And it's a 6th round pick. So we're just going to throw the dart and we're going to hope this guy pans out. The scouting report on him, he's a safety that has a little bit of versatility to him. He can play up high as a deep safety. He can come down. He can help against the run. He's maybe not the most physical or sure-handed tackler available, but again, that's why he's a 6th round pick. But the word is he's a high IQ guy. He's got the adequate athleticism needed to play the position. So you go out there and you take the guy that you like. I don't know anything about the guy, but I don't know. I'd be hard pressed to give it worse than a C.
Yeah. And then the Dolphins rounded out their 2024 draft in round number 7, picking a guy who was a kind of favorite weapon of the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Taj Washington, wide receiver, USC. So the Dolphins drafted a pair of Washingtons here, got Taj Washington with their final pick in the draft at number 241. Brain, tell me about Taj Washington.
Yeah, so it's another smaller wide receiver who kind of projects to be more of a slot guy. But again, this is another receiver that was very productive at the college level. And, you know, you just kind of, you throw a dart and you say, all right, we like this guy's potential. This guy could potentially be a piece. Maybe he makes a role immediately on special teams. More likely than not, he's a practice squad developmental piece for you down the road. But I don't mind the fact that we're investing in that position, given the uncertainty of that position after you get through Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, and what the uncertainty at that position looked like going down the stretch for this team last year, because we know that in Mike McDaniel's offense, this offense particular, because it's been built around having Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, you need wide receivers. And so I don't mind them investing in the position. Do I think Taj Washington is going to go out and even make the roster this year? Probably not. I think he'd be hard pressed. So it's your last pick in the draft, 7th round pick. If you get anything out of this guy, if this guy ever makes the roster for you and gives you any sort of positive contribution, then you did a decent job with this pick. So, whatever. I don't even know that it's worth a grade, but if I'm going to give it a grade, I'll probably give this one a C or whatever.
A B minus.
B minus, C plus, whatever.
So to recap, the Miami Dolphins 2024 draft class at number 21, Chop Robinson, edge, Penn State. Number 55, Patrick Paul, offensive tackle from Houston. Jaylen Wright was at pick number 120, a running back from Tennessee. At 158, they got Mo Kamara, edge from Colorado State. At 184, Malik Washington, wide receiver from Virginia. Rest in peace, Dan Feeney. He's not dead. He just doesn't work here anymore. Round 6 at 198, Patrick McMorris, safety from California. And to finish it up in round 7 at number 241, the Miami Dolphins drafted Taj Washington, wide receiver, University of Southern California. And then after that, the Dolphins weren't done yet because, as always, they signed a bunch of undrafted free agents. Here is the roundup. Quarterback Gavin Hardison from UTEP, safety Mark Perry from TCU, wide receiver Jaquan Burton from FAU. They also signed tight end Hayden Rucci from Wisconsin, defensive lineman Grayson Murphy from UCLA, guard Matthew Jones from Ohio State, cornerback, my favorite name by far, affiliated with the Miami Dolphins at this point in time, cornerback Storm Duck from Louisville, offensive lineman Byron Matos from USF. I believe he's an NFL International Pathway Program player. They also have offensive lineman Andrew Meyer from UTEP and safety Jordan Colbert, Rhode Island. That is your UDFA roundup. Anybody in there stand out to you, Bryn?
Look, I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about these guys. So nobody really stands out, but
I'm not going to tell me about Storm Duck.
I mean, obviously I love the name. And you know, I think there's, you know, potentially an opportunity for the Dolphins for one of these guys, for a cornerback to be somebody that sneaks in. I don't know that that's the easiest pathway. I think they got a tight end. I think that guy might have an inside track. I think if you're an interior defensive lineman or an interior offensive lineman, maybe you've got a little bit of an outside. It's probably going to be difficult for a UDFA offensive lineman, honestly, to make this roster, given the amount of depth that they've added there, and especially if they go out and they get another guy. I don't know that there's a ton of potential as far as guys that are going to make the roster, but you know, is there a linebacker that they brought in? Is there I think the tight end is probably your best bet as a guy that can make the roster, because there's upgradable pieces there, because outside of Jonnu Smith and Durham Smythe, I think it's up for grabs at that position. So I think
whoa, that is some Jody Fortson erasure.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. Okay. Well, we know where you stand on Jody Fortson. Anyway, Brain, before you give your overall draft grade to the Miami Dolphins, I put it out to the world. I asked the folks in the stream to share their thoughts with us, and we got a lot of content. You'll sense the theme here. JM Santos says B. Jordan Murray says B. John Guell says B+. Brad Keel, B+. Wesley Gray, B+. Cap for Life says C, because we had one pick taken away from us. Victor Lozano, B+. Newfoundland, B. Johnny Tadeo says B+. John Laporle says C-. Eric Cochran, B+. Duke Tomlinson, B. Everybody kind of living in the same realm there, Bryn.
Yeah.
I also posed this question to twitter.com. And I for twitter.com, I posed it two different ways. Okay. The first way I asked it, Brent, was I said, grade the Miami Dolphins 2024 draft based specifically on how it affects their 2024 season. Okay. And the results here came in 9.6% of respondents said, I'll go from the lowest percentage to the highest. Lowest percentage, 5.8% said a D or F. 9.6% said A. 32.7% said C. And 51.9% of respondents graded the Dolphins 2024 draft as a B, specifically as it pertains to the 2024 season.
Interesting.
Then I asked it again.
You know what I voted for on that poll?
What did you vote for?
D or F.
Wow. Interesting. We'll unpack that a little bit in a moment. But then I adjusted it. I adjusted the question and I said, grade the Miami Dolphins 2024 draft based specifically on how it affects them in 2024 and beyond. And the number shifted. 2% said D or F. 14.1% graded it a C. 21.6% graded it an A, and 62.4% graded the draft as a B, in terms of how it affects the Dolphins in 24 and beyond. So, as I suspected would happen, we saw the grades go up once you incorporate future planning. So, Brain, now I want to ask you. Now, you said, in as much as it pertains specifically to 2024, you would give it a D or an F. So
it would have been a D. It would have been a D.
Okay. So unpack that a little bit.
Well, I mean, if you're just talking 2024.
Because interestingly, because I will say this. When grading the picks, the worst grade that you gave it was who? Patrick Paul. You gave a D?
Honestly, Patrick Paul was the only pick that I really didn't like. I didn't love the Chop Robinson pick, but I understood it and I can get behind it. I can make a lot of sense. I can make sense of the Patrick Paul pick. I just really didn't like it, especially given that the following the Chop Robinson pick. And we're sticking just simply on 2024.
This for now, if you quickly give us your thoughts on why it's a D for 2024 and then give us your overall grade.
Well, because for 2024, what you've added with your 2 high leverage picks is a tackle that's probably not going to see the field or is going to see the field as like a 6th offensive lineman on special packages or as an emergency tackle if they get ravaged with injuries. And with your number 1 pick, you've got a guy who is really not ready to be an every down contributor, is going to struggle against the run and is basically going to be a pass rush specialist. And so I think you maybe have in your first 2 picks, maybe you've got like 400 snaps, 500 snaps.
Yeah.
And that's no bueno. And then even your 3rd pick that you traded up for is going to come into 2024 as the 3rd running back on your depth chart.
All right. I mean, fair enough. So then talk to me about your grade overall. Well, actually, before you do that, I'll give my grade overall because I was pretty clear about for this draft to be successful. And granted, we're not going to know, but for the draft to be successful, I said the Dolphins needed to pick 2 guys that were immediate contributors year 1. In my brain, that meant pick number 21 and pick number 55. I think it is very fair to say that pick 21, Chop Robinson, is going to be a contributor this year. Barring injury, he will be a contributor this year because, I mean, and I say this not knowing what the status of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb is going to be on day 1. But regardless, Chop Robinson is going to be a contributor in some way because I imagine he's going to slot into that Andrew Van Ginkel role or similar. You're going to see him. Patrick Paul, I don't think we're going to see at all. Or let me rephrase that. I think the plan is going to be for us to not see him at all. There may be injuries. We may end up seeing him, but I think that the plan is going to be that we don't. But then the Dolphins got Jaylen Wright, who I suspect is going to be added to the committee for the Dolphins. I suspect that based on how Raheem Mostert's body Raheem Mostert, what a player. Okay. Phenomenal player, incredible heart, grit, so much grit and determination. But even with all of that, his body is breaking down late in the season, especially considering the higher workload that he has handled. With Devon Achane being on the scene, Mostert, still getting hurt, and now Jaylen Wright being added to the picture, I suspect they're going to even things out a bit more in this committee. So Jaylen Wright is going to be a contributor. I suspect Malik Washington is going to be a contributor in this offense. Maybe it's not as likely as the other things, but I feel like we're going to see him. I feel like we're going to see Malik Washington. So with all of that said, I would probably give this draft, I wouldn't call it a B+, but I'd probably nail it as a B. Like overall, I would give it a B just by those standards. They didn't completely fail. I don't feel like I'm walking away from this draft going, none of these guys are going to start. But that's kind of where I That's kind of how I feel about it. Brain,
well,
what's your grade?
realistically, actually, that's probably the case by the time you get to the end of the season. When all things are healthy, when everybody's healthy, next season, none of these guys are going to start. Because if Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are healthy, I don't think Chop Robinson is an every down starter next season. Patrick Paul, we've already covered, is not going to start. Jaylen Wright is not going to start. Malik Washington, while I love the pick where they got him, if the Dolphins go out and add an Odell Beckham Jr., then at best, Malik Washington is the fourth receiver on this team. And there is a case to be made that he's going to end up being the fifth receiver because he's still got to beat out Eric Ezukanma, who I think there's a role for. And so I'm not sold that Malik Washington is going to be a big contributor in 2024. And then I think the guy that I probably feel the most confident is going to be, I guess Mohamed Kamara is another guy. I think Mohamed Kamara can come in and be a little bit more pro-ready to put his hand in the dirt and also come from a 2-point stance. I think more so than Chop Robinson, just doesn't have the upside ceiling of a Chop Robinson. But again, if Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips are healthy, this guy's not a starter when all things are right either. So I don't know that the Dolphins have any starters.
But they've got guys that are going to contribute, and that's the key.
Yeah, well, no, and I get that. But like when you said, oh, do they have any starters, or like they've got a couple guys that are starters? I think when all things are healthy and things matter, if this Dolphins team is going to be where they want to be in 2024, if your goal was to get better for 2024, I mean, maybe you got better in September and October, but in the grand scheme of things, I think you added some depth piece. You didn't really add anybody that's really moving the needle for 2024. If that's what you're basing this question on. Now, if you want to make the argument, okay, well, what about in general? What about for 2025 and beyond? Then you can make the case that the Chop Robinson pick is a really good pick. If you really like Patrick Paul and his upside, you can make a case that has the potential to be a home run pick. And you can go down the road and you can make the case that this was a really good draft for the future. Here's my thing with this draft. I don't even care that it's not about 2024 because I don't think this team's winning a Super Bowl in 2024. And I wouldn't have, not that they're not going to go out and compete and have a shot to win the AFC East and have a shot to win a playoff game. I just don't think the ceiling is going to be there for this team necessarily this season. I think they lost a lot, and I think they still really haven't replaced their major losses. And the biggest problem I have with this draft,
caveat, I'm just going to go ahead and insert this here because you're not saying it in as many words, but I want to be clear that you're saying that with the understanding that there is still 5 months between now and the start of the season.
Yes. No, 100%. You don't need to have a team built to play on May 1st.
Correct.
Absolutely right. Here's the issue that I have. It's a very cookie cutter way of building a roster that Chris Grier has made abundantly clear. He's going to value the premier positions, and he's going to value traits more than he is going to value production or film. And generally, when it comes to the players that he's picked who have been drafted before they were anticipated because of their traits, even and despite of having questionable film, those picks have generally not panned out. The 4 guys that come to my mind that fit that mold are Austin Jackson, Noah Igbenogany, Raekwon Davis, and there was one other one that I tweeted out that's escaping me at this moment. Channing Tindall.
Yeah, that's the other one.
Yeah, that's the other one. And you could say what you want about Austin Jackson coming into his own in year 4, but getting one good year in your 4th year after 3 years of really bad film and no production at all is not what you're looking for in a first round pick. And Channing Tindall is going to come into year 3 and he's going to have no production. Noah Igbenogany, look, it's been beaten to death. He's a bust. Raekwon Davis is probably the best value of that. And as a second round pick, a rotational defensive tackle that never really found his footing and had a position is not really what you're looking at for in a second round pick. And so generally his track record when he takes those kinds of guys has been very poor. And secondly, they keep doing this where they're building and taking these players and they're passing up on it's the opportunity cost because there are good players that I think are safer picks that would step in and not just start right off the bat, but would slot right in and you'd feel with a lot more confidence would be quality starters down the road than their first 2 picks. And what you end up with is you end up saying you sell yourself on the upside and you say, well, these are premium positions. And if this guy pans out, that's great. And if we got our tackle, now we're great. And we got all these weapons on the edge and that's great. And, we have all this stuff, but where the Dolphins are weak and have continued to be weak and are still weak coming out of this draft? The inside, where it matters in December and January, because the teams that win when you get to December and January can beat you up in the middle. And the Dolphins lost their 2 biggest losses this offseason were Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins, and they have not been replaced. In fact, they have gotten smaller and softer inside. And so this team, while it's exciting to think about all the weapons, and we're going to have September and October, and this team is probably going to be the best offense in the league in September and October. But we're going to get to December and January, and all of a sudden it's going to be harder to throw the ball. And we're going to be asking ourselves on those short yardage, well, can we run up the middle? And I don't know that we've addressed that. I don't know that we're going to address that. We certainly didn't address it in the draft. And defensively, you lost your best run defender in Christian Wilkins. You've got issues at the edge as far as guys that are complete defensive ends that can defend against the run. And the edge defender that you're bringing in, that you're highly touting with your number 1 pick, is a guy who's probably not going to be he's probably going to be a net negative when he's on the field on running downs. So I think what you're going to end up with, granted, there's time to fill these needs. I think the Dolphins have left major holes on the interior and in places that really matter, not just for 2024, but also and beyond. And it's the scope of this is how Chris Grier drafts. This is an ideology. It's a philosophy. And that's the biggest problem that I have with it. It's not because he's drafting for 2025 instead of 2024. I laud him for drafting for 2025 instead of 2024 because, frankly, I think that that's more important. It's the ideology of how he's building the team that continues to be lacking, in my opinion.
So give it a grade.
B-.
No, that said, it's still a passing grade.
Well, yeah, no, it's not it's not a bad draft. I prefaced it by saying the only pick that I did not like was Patrick Paul. I think they got good players, but I think the opportunity cost and the way that they went about it, the first 2 picks, I think that's where the majority of my grade is going to be weighted. I would have, if I'm at 21 and I actually stuck and pick, I'm probably taking Graham Barton because I'm saying, look, this guy could play tackle if I needed him to, can definitely step in and be a starting guard right away, and projects to be a very good starting guard or center going forward wherever you needed him. And I think that would have more value, but Chris Grier doesn't value the position. Then you get to the second round and you have Patrick Paul getting picked because he's a tackle, and the Dolphins need to draft their tackle of the future. But I'm looking at him looking over possibly the best safety in the draft in Javon Bullard, quality wide receivers that would come in and step in right away and have higher ceilings than the guys that they ended up drafting, like Malachi Corley. Also, Christian Haynes, the tackle / guard out of Connecticut, where given that you didn't take Graham Barton in the first round, there was another opportunity to have a slam dunk pick with a guy that would slot right in, be a starting guard this year. You wouldn't have to address it with any of your June 1st money, and he's probably going to be a Robert Hunt replacement. That's the guy that he compares most favorably to, and you've basically replaced him for cheaper. If they would have made that the pick in round 2, I would have said, man, that's a great pick. But it's the opportunity cost because he's so bent on, I got to take a tackle, I got to take an edge defender, I got to take a wide receiver, that the middle of our team remains weak.
So there it is. There are the brain's thoughts. I won't come back with the argument that has been made that you're about to pay a lot of money to your starting quarterback, and so it makes sense to bank on paying guys in premier positions like, Chop Robinson, Mo Kamara, potentially Patrick Paul, to have those guys on rookie deals. But that also completely ignores the fact that you're going to be paying a huge contract to Jalen Phillips and a huge contract to Jalen Waddle coming up in addition to your quarterback. But that's a conversation for another day.
Can I touch on that real quick? I won't be long-winded.
He says,
if Patrick Paul doesn't work out, you're going to end up having to spend premier money. You're going to end up having to spend a ton of money on a left tackle in 2025.
It's true.
And they're going to have a decent idea going into 2025, but after seeing him practice, they're either going to spend a lot of money knowing that it's a bad pick, or they're going to throw him out there. And if they throw him out there in 2025 and he's not ready, it's going to be a disaster.
Well, will it be a disaster? We're going to find out, and we're going to find out. Well, hopefully maybe we won't find out this year, but we'll see. We're going to keep an eye on it. At any rate, that's going to put a wrap on this Same Old Dolphin Show episode discussing the draft. I don't know if we're going to be back next week, Brain. I guess we'll see how things play out, see if there's some news off the field, see how things develop. We're now into that part of the season where we're gonna be kind of just playing it by ear. The schedule's going to be a little bit less frequent because we're getting into now the time of year where things slow down. But as news breaks and as stories begin to develop, we'll be here. And everybody, we're going to have you covered here at DolphinsTalk.com. So make sure you are subscribed to that channel. Make sure you've liked the video, comment, let us know what your draft grade is. We want to hear from you. Make sure you're following us at Amplify to Rock, at Aaron the Brain. That's at Aaron the Brain. The show is at Same Old Dolphins. Again, Mike, I know, has said this, and I just want to echo these sentiments. Thanks to everybody who takes the time to listen and watch a video. And if you smash the like button, if you subscribe to the channel, if you leave a comment, I mean, even if you don't, if you listen and you hate it and you think we're dumb, fine. That's fine too. But thank you for at least taking a moment to listen, because that's what makes this happen. It's the only reason we do the show is because people listen, and people actually, to know that there are so many of you that week in, week out, will reach out and be like, hey, when's the next show? I haven't heard from you guys. The fact that we're doing the show on a Wednesday this week instead of when we typically do it live on Monday night. And I had people reaching out to me, going, well, where are you guys? What's going on? That is amazing to me. So thank you to everybody for listening. We appreciate it. We appreciate you and look forward to being with you all through the off season and all the way up through the season. So thank you as always for listening. We will be back when we are back. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, wait a minute, I can't end the show. We didn't talk about this abomination of a dolphin logo.
Oh.
Have you seen this thing?
I've seen it, yeah.
This abomination of a new Dolphins logo that they are that is being floated as potentially a new logo for the team. Let me say this. If this is the new logo for the Miami Dolphins, ball it up, throw it in a garbage can, set it on fire, pee on it to put the fire out, and then throw it into another garbage can. It is horrendous and awful. It looks like you know what it looks like? It looks like somebody said to AI, please come up with a Miami Dolphins logo. That's what it looks like. It's terrible. It's horrendous. It's bad. I also want to address another thing because I know some people are up in arms about this. Well, it's the end of the show. If anybody's still listening, these are the diehards now, right? These are the people. So the Miami Dolphins hired a very expensive marketing team to get them to a new official hashtag. So now on Twitter, if you do hashtag fins up, you no longer get the little Miami Dolphins logo because it's no longer the official hashtag of the Miami Dolphins. The new official hashtag of the Miami Dolphins is hashtag Go Fins. And there are people up in arms. I'm not going to say Go Fins. I'm not going to blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to say, so what? Who cares? Say what you want to say to cheer for the team. And by the way, let me tell you this. At some point, some marketing person told you that you needed to say fins up because that was never a thing.
Yeah. It wasn't a thing until what's his face? Jimmy Buffett came out with that friggin' song.
Yeah. It was never a thing until some marketing person latched onto it and said, that's what we're going to say for this team. So they've done this to you already. So if you don't want to say Go Fins, that's fine. Don't say Go Fins. I never said fins up. You know what I say? It's what I say when I close the show. It's what I'm going to say right now. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, go Dolphins!
I hope so badly that this time next year or even 2 years from now that I'm going to be the president of the Patrick Paul fan club.